Hello, welcome again to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing on the YouTube channels. Uh, I'm reading a chapter of each book that I've written. I've got 14 books written, so I'm up on one, two, three, four, five. My fifth book, which is the middle book of the trilogy Love Endures All Things. And the first two, that's just, let's see, one, two, three, four, five, yeah, fifth book. Uh, the first two books I presented here were Dad's Old Truck Volume 1, Dad's Old Truck Volume 2, and they are true history stories of my growing up. I lived in Oklahoma and when I was young, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, California, Arkansas. Mom and Dad were not in the military, they were just travelers. Anyway, and then I published a story called Imagination, and that book had some stories I made up, just fantasy stories, and it had a couple of stories that were true life, and I wanted to read that one before I started the Love Endures All Things because it related to Love Endures All Things, some of the stories in it, and then I started Love Endures All Things, Book One, which told the first 15 years or so of myself and Stephanie's marriage. And then now I'm on Love Endures All Things Across the Creek, which was the middle 15 or 18 years, something like that, of our marriage. When I finish this one, I will do Love Endures All Things, the Deep South, which ended up being the last 15 to 17 years of our marriage. We were married 47 and a half years. Uh, and I had known her 48 years and 2 days when she passed. 48 years less 2 days when she passed away. She passed away December 5th, December 9th, 2015. That was a long time ago now. Been working on 7 years now. But I met my uh, editor after Stephanie passed away. I'd written several books by then, but they weren't edited worth a flip. And so when I met her, she edited everything I've written and everything I've written since. And her name is Vicki Meadows, a wonderful editor. I'm proud of the work I've done. I'm proud of the work she's done. So I wanted to give a shout out there. Chapter 2, The Back Way, is the title of this chapter. If you remember the last chapter, I wrote about cops running through our yard, telling us staying in the house, and then looking for a piece of property out in the country, and we ended up at the end of the civilization, right on the edge of national forest and the wild woods. But anyway, and so let me continue with uh, chapter 2, the back way. Stephanie and I drove up the back way that Jim had described to us the next day in our pickup. We wanted to test the road that would be our emergency exit should we ever need it. We left Fort Smith at 9 a.m., and it took almost 1 hour to get to Nycut and the low water bridge. The road going to Nycut was a good paved road, but it had 90-degree turns every mile or so. If you followed the property, it followed the property lines, and that made it a whole lot slower to drive to go only 30 miles. When we got to the low water bridge, it was still running very fast and was very deep. It was so deep I couldn't chance my pickup. We stopped and got out and looked at it for a few minutes when we noticed an old pickup come up the other side of the creek. A young boy drove it, perhaps 15 years old. He stopped and got out and looked at the creek for a moment. I told Stephanie that the way back must be passable, or this fellow would not have made it, so it gave us hope. This young man then got back into his pickup and started it and drove to the edge of the water and stopped again. He opened the door to his truck and stood up in the doorway. He then sat down in the truck and gunned the motor and started into the creek. And as he entered the creek, the sound of his motor became muffled by being underwater, and you could hardly hear it above the sound of the creek. His truck had no muffler, so it was loud. The water rose up over the bumper, and he continued. Then, as he came to the edge of the slab, the truck plunged into the deeper part of the road, and the water went up to the dashboard and completely covered the hood of his truck. He continued to gun the motor, and as he moved forward, he created a wake that was half the height of his windshield. He was moving across the creek on the slab with ease, it seemed. The crossing there is just over 100 foot long. This lad made it about 75 feet when water filled the cab and his motor quit and he was stuck in the creek. By this time, others had come to see the creek, and he had some friends there who were laughing at his antics and offered to help him get his truck out of the water. They hooked about 4 chains together and used another fellow's pickup to pull his out. The water flowed quite fast there, and Stephanie and I were surprised that the truck didn't just wash away. We turned around and started the long trek to go over the mountain the back way. As we drove, we talked of the foolishness of a kid trying to cross that slab without even being able to see it. We crossed the first metal bridge over Little Lee's Creek, the creek we'd just been looking at, and made our way down the road until we came to the next big metal bridge that crossed Lee's Creek. We turned on the dirt road that met the highway just before we crossed the bridge over Lee's Creek. We talked about how the road was not so bad so far, and maybe it would be a better way to the place than the other. As we started up the dirt road, the road was slightly more than one lane and was not nearly as smooth as the pavement was. It soon became much worse. The road had caused, the road caused the truck to bounce and give us a rough ride. 5 miles on pavement is not bad because you can travel 60 miles an hour, but on dirt, you're lucky if you can go 20 miles an hour. That makes a 5 mile trip take about 3 times as long. We reached the only side road and took it to the north, and it proceeded to go down a very steep hill that ended in an alpine valley in the top of that mountain. There was a creek that crossed the road there, and the man that lived there in that lovely valley was Paul Powers. He had installed a low water bridge to help him retain a pond that he had built. This backed up a nice little lake and gave a smooth passage over the creek. As soon as you crossed the creek, the road started up a very steep hill. It climbed about 200 feet in about a third of a mile. Toward the top of the climb, there were stair step rocks that the truck had to climb over at about 6 to 8 inches each one, about as tall as the curb on a city street. They caused the truck tires to spin at each step and make you have to gun the engine. I had to back down and try them 3 times before I got through those steps made of stone. Those caused us to bounce to the roof of the cab on many of the steps. Once to the top of the first climb, the road smoothed out for a good quarter-mile on a straight and steady incline. The road had spots with deep ruts that would hold you in the most worn out parts of the road. The ruts would jerk the truck first to the right and then to the left, giving a very difficult ride. At each jerk, muddy water would splash all over the truck and obscure the windshield. At the end of that quarter-mile, the road turned left and uh, formed was formed from coarse sandstone, which made it bumpy, but better than the ruts we had just passed. This traveled about a half a mile in a constant gradual climb. The road made a dip of about 10 foot, and a small stream crossed the road there. It caused a jagged washout 6 to 8 inches deep and about a foot wide at 90 degrees to the road. The road then became smooth and level for another half mile with a sandy bed. We then came upon a large mud puddle that looked deep with ruts that had been wallowed out from the different sized tires traversing into the hole. The ruts directed you into the center of the mud puddle. I got out and broke off a stick from a nearby sapling to check the depth and see if I thought I could pass without getting stuck. The ruts were almost the depth of the axle, and I concluded I could pass if I had some speed on my side. I backed up about half of that portion of the road and made a run at the mud puddle. We bounced our way through the mud and came out the other side. It may have been 20 foot across. The next section of the road was in very good shape, and we traveled it without incident. When we came to a T in the road, and the right side seemed well traveled, and the left side seemed almost unused. The intersection, let's see, we knew we were to go left at all intersections, so we got out of the truck and judged another deep mud hole. This one had a good solid bottom and had no ruts in it. It ran alongside of a steep bank where the hill fell away from the road. There were lots of trees, and we could see through the woods nicely on either side, and no brush to speak of. The road was starting down on the downside, so we concluded we must be at the top of this mountain. The road was very solid with rock base and relatively smooth. The road descended sometimes steeply and other times more slowly. The hill rose sharply on the left side of the road, and we came to a spot where I had to stop and get out and look. The road had a homemade bridge in this spot at one time. It must have seen better days. The bridge was made of tightly stacked stones that were cemented together. There was a 6 foot span where the bridge top had rotted away long ago. Some of them, or someone, had placed a collection of logs across the bridge to form a roadway. You had to straddle the two logs on either side with your tires and hope you didn't fall into the gaping hole that was left between the logs. This crossing would be a nail biting experience. We had come too far for me to turn back now. I could see tire tracks on either side of this rickety bridge, and I decided to go over it. After I had walked and jumped on the log several times, Stephanie got out and waited for me to find success in the crossing. The oak logs were very sturdy and worked quite well, though it was still scary to do this. No help for maybe 5 or 10 miles. The hill descended another 300 to 400 feet and settled into a large plateau with a good, smooth, sandy road where we were able to see some deserted home places. There was also another road that headed off to the right of this road. We stayed left and soon came to where the road settled its or started its steep decline once again. This time it followed closely to the side of the hill with a steep bank that went up on the left and one that went down on the right. This road had a very deep washout on the left side, close to the hill, where water had carved a channel maybe 6 foot deep. It it would turn the truck over on its side if you got too close to it and slipped in. The hillside was formed of beautiful flat rocks that were the size of bricks and contained every color in the rainbow. I thought how great they would be for building. The road slowly leveled off and opened into a flat field to the left and a very nice house to the right. The house was vacant. The road gradually went downhill until we came to the creek where we had seen the kid get flooded out. Our driveway ran alongside the creek and dumped into a field where we could get to our place. The trip over the hill took us almost 2 hours, and the creek had gone down only a little bit in that time. We had only traveled 15 miles. We drove up to our place and then turned around and started back. We stopped at the nice house and could not get an answer at the door. The house had no furnishings in it. We made the arduous trek back over the hill. It would take another hour and a half to get back to Nycut. That is where we realized why we got such a good deal on the property we had bought. We think that all things considered, we paid a fair price given the difficulty to reach the place. Thank you for sitting through this chapter describing how hard it was to get in and out of a place like that. I will pick up here in a little bit, or tomorrow or the next day or whatever, and do the next chapter, which is called Barn Raising. And this chapter is exactly what it sounds like, except we're talking about a house. God bless you and keep you safe. If you like what I'm doing, hit the like button, hit the share button, and share it with others you think might enjoy these stories. Uh, the Dad's Old Truck series and the Love Endures All Things series are a tale of my life from about 9 years old all the way up to about 70 years old. Yeah, about 70. Anyway, God bless you. Take care. Uh, you can find my books at this web page, curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com. But you can also find them on my YouTube page, which is Curtis Jones Author page, uh, at Facebook. God bless you until I present another one. Bye bye.